Today we're going to talk about a subject near and dear to my white male heart, imperialism. So here at Crash Course, we occasionally try to point out that the U.S., much as we hate to admit it, is actually part of a larger world. Mr. Green, you mean like Alaska? No, me from the past. For reasons that you will understand after your trip there before your senior year of college, I do not acknowledge the existence of Canada's tail. No, I'm referring to all of the green parts of not America and the period in the 19th century when we thought maybe we could make all those green parts like America, but, you know, without rights and stuff. So the late 19th and early 20th centuries were a period of expansion and colonization in Asia and Africa, mostly by European powers. As you'll know if you watch Crash Course World History, imperialism has a long, long history pretty much everywhere. So this round of empire building is sometimes called, rather confusingly, new imperialism. Because the US acquired territory beyond its continental boundaries in this period, it's relatively easy to fit American history into this world history paradigm. But there's also an argument that the United States has always been an empire. From very early on, the European settlers who became Americans were intent on pushing westward and conquering territory. The obvious victims of this expansion/imperialism were the Native Americans, but we can also include the Mexicans who lost their sovereignty after 1848. And if that doesn't sound like an empire to you, allow me to draw your attention to the Russian Empire. Russians were taking control of territory in Central Asia and Siberia and either absorbing or displacing the native people who lived there, which was the exact same thing that we were doing. The empires of the late 19th and early 20th centuries were different because they were colonial in their own special way. Like Europeans and Americans would rule other places, but they wouldn't settle them and more or less completely displace the native people there. Well, except for you, Australia and New Zealand. American historians used to try to excuse America's acquisitions of a territorial empire as something of an embarrassing mistake, but that's misleading because one of the primary causes of the phenomenon of American imperialism was economics. We needed places to sell our amazing new products. And at the time, China actually had all of the customers because apparently it was opposite day. It's also not an accident that the US began pursuing imperialism in earnest during the 1890s, as this was in many ways a decade of crisis in America. The influx of immigrants in the crowded cities added to anxiety and concern over America's future, and then to cap it all off in 1893, a panic caused by the failure of a British bank led the US into a horrible economic depression. A Great Depression, but not the Great Depression. It did, however, feature 15,000 business failures and 17% unemployment, so take that, 2008. According to American diplomatic historian George Herring, imperialism was just what the doctor ordered to help America get out of its depression. Other historians, notably Kristen Hoganson, imply that America embarked on imperial adventures partly so that American men could prove to themselves how manly they were, you know, by joining the Navy and setting sail for distant waters. In 1890, Captain Alfred Thayer Mahan published The Influence of Sea Power Upon History and argued that to be a great power, like Great Britain, the US needed to control the seas and dominate international commerce. Tied into this push to become a maritime power was the obsession with building a canal through Central America, and eventually the US decided that it should be built in Panama because, you know, how else are we going to get malaria? In order to protect this canal, we would need a man, a plan, a canal, Panama. Sorry, I just wanted to get the palindrome in there somewhere. No, we would actually need much more than a man and a plan. We would need ships, and in order to have a functioning two-ocean navy, we would need colonies. Why? Because the steamships at the time were powered by coal, and in order to refuel, they needed coal depots. I mean, I suppose we could have rented harbor space, but why rent when you can conquer? Also, nationalism and the accompanying pride in one's country was a worldwide phenomenon to which the US was not immune. I mean, it's no accident that the 1890s saw Americans begin to recite the Pledge of Allegiance and celebrate Flag Day. And what better way to instill national pride than by flying the stars and stripes over Guam. So pre-Civil War attempts to expand beyond what we now know as the continental United States included our efforts to annex Canada, which were sadly unsuccessful, and also filibustering, which before it meant a senator talking until he or she had to stop to pee, was a thing where we tried to take over Central America to spread slavery. But the idea of taking Cuba persisted into the late 19th century because it is close and also beautiful. The Grant administration wanted to annex it and the Dominican Republic, but Congress demurred. But we didn't succeed in purchasing Canada's tail. You can see how I feel about that. To be fair, discovery of gold in the Yukon made Seward's icebox seem like less of a Seward's folly, and it did provide coaling stations in the Pacific. But we could have had rum and Caribbean beaches. Oh, Stan always talk about how much I hate Alaska as an overheated. I gotta take off my shirt. Oh, my life. So hard to take off your shirt dramatically. I'm angry. Anyway, coal stations in the Pacific were important because in 1854, we opened Japan to American trade by sending a flotilla of threatening black ships under Matthew Perry. No, Stan, not that Matthew Perry. You know better. By far, America's best piece of imperial business before 1898 was Hawaii. Like, I like oil and gold as much as the next guy, but Hawaii has pineapples and also sugar, which were grown on American-owned plantations by Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, and native workers. Treaties between the U.S. and Hawaiian governments exempted this sugar from tariffs, and America also had established a naval base at Pearl Harbor, which seemed like a really good idea. Then. We eventually annexed Hawaii in 1898, and this meant that it could eventually become a state, which it did in 1959, 2 years before Barack Obama was born in Kenya. And this leads us nicely to the high tide of American imperialism, the Spanish-American-Cuban-Filipino War. The war started out because native Cubans were revolting against Spain, which was holding on to Cuba for dear life as the remnant of a once great empire. The Cubans' fight for independence was brutal. 95,000 Cubans died from disease and malnutrition after Spanish General Valeriano Weiler herded Cubans into concentration camps. For this, Weiler was called Butcher in the American Yellow Press, which sold a lot of newspapers on the backs of stories about his atrocities. And at last we come to President William McKinley, who responded cautiously with a demand that Spain get out of Cuba or face war. Now, Spain knew that it couldn't win a war with the U.S., but as George Herring put it, they preferred the honor of war to the ignominy of surrender. Let that be a lesson to you. Always choose ignominy. Oh, it's time for the mystery document? The rules here are simple. I guess the author of the mystery document, I'm either right or I get shocked. All right, let's see what we got today. With such a conflict waged for years in an island so near us, and with which our people have such trade and business relations, when the lives and the liberty of our own citizens are in constant danger and their property destroyed and themselves ruined, where our trading vessels are liable to seizure and are seized at our very doorstep by warships of a foreign nation, the expeditions of filibustering that we are powerless to prevent altogether, all these and others that I need not mention, with the resulting strained relations, are a constant menace to our peace, and compel us to keep on a semi-war footing with a nation with which we are at peace. Thank you, Stan. This is obviously President William McKinley's war message to Congress. You can tell it's a war message because it includes the word peace more than the word war. By the way, it's commonly thought that President McKinley asked Congress for a declaration of war. He didn't. He let Congress take the lead. That's the only time that's ever happened in all of American history, which would be more impressive if we had declared war more than 5 times. So the document shows us that, at least according to McKinley, we officially went to war for American peace of mind and to end economic uncertainty. It was not to gain territory, at least not in Cuba. How do we know? Because Congress also passed the Teller Amendment, which forswore any U.S. annexation of Cuba, perhaps because representatives of the U.S. sugar industry, like Colorado Senator Henry Teller, feared competition from sugar produced in an American Cuba. Or maybe not, but probably so. Also not the cause of the war was the sinking of the USS Maine. The battleship, which had been in Havana's harbor to protect American interests, sank after an explosion on February 15, 1898, killing 266 sailors. Now, most historians chalk up the sinking to an internal explosion and not to Spanish sabotage. But that didn't stop Americans from blaming the Spanish with their memorable meme, "Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain." Let's go to the thought bubble. The actual war was one of the most successful in U.S. history, especially if you measure success by brevity and relative paucity of deaths. Secretary of State John Hay called it a splendid little war, and in many ways it was. Fighting lasted about 4 months, and fewer than 400 Americans were killed in combat, although 5,000 died of, wait for it, disease. Disease always ruining everything. There weren't a ton of battles, but those that happened got an inordinate amount of press coverage, like the July attack on San Juan Hill at the Cuban city of Santiago, led by future President Theodore Roosevelt. While it was a successful battle, the real significance is that it furthered Roosevelt's career. He returned a hero, promptly became governor of New York, and by 1900 was McKinley's vice president, which was a good job to have because McKinley would eventually be assassinated. A more important battle was that of Manila Bay, in which Commodore George Dewey destroyed a tiny Spanish fleet and took the Philippines. This battle took place in May of 1898, well before the attack on Cuba, which strongly suggests that a war that was supposedly about supporting Cuban independence was really about something else. And what was that something else? Oh, right, a territorial empire. As a result of the war, the U.S. got a bunch of new territories, notably the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam. We also used the war as an opportunity to annex Hawaii to protect our ships that would be steaming toward the Philippines. We didn't annex Cuba, but we didn't let it become completely independent either. The Platt Amendment in the Cuban Constitution authorized American military intervention whenever it saw fit and gave us a permanent lease for a naval base at Guantanamo Bay. Thanks, Honorable. So Cuba and Puerto Rico were gateways to Latin American markets. Puerto Rico was particularly useful as a naval station. Hawaii, Guam, and especially the Philippines opened up access to China. American presence in China was bolstered by our contribution of about 3,000 troops to the multinational force that helped put down the Boxer Rebellion in 1900. But in the Philippines, where Americans had initially been welcome, opinions soon changed after it became clear that Americans were there to stay and exercise control. Emiliano Aguinaldo, leader of the Filipino rebellion against Spain, quickly turned against the U.S. because his real goal was independence, and it appeared the U.S. would not provide it. The resulting Philippine War lasted 4 years, from 1899 to 1903, and 4,200 Americans were killed, as well as over 100,000 Filipinos. The Americans committed atrocities, including putting Filipinos in concentration camps, torturing prisoners, rape, and executing civilians. And much of this was racially motivated, and news of these atrocities helped to spur anti-imperialist sentiment at home, with Mark Twain being one of the most outspoken critics. Now, there was some investment in modernization in the Philippines, in railroads, schools, and public health, but the interests of the local people were usually subordinated to those of the wealthy. So American imperialism, in short, looked like most other imperialisms. So Constitution nerds will remember that the US Constitution has no provision for colonies, only territory that will eventually be incorporated as states. Congress attempted to deal with this issue by passing the Foraker Act in 1900. This law declared that Puerto Rico would be an insular territory. Its inhabitants would be citizens of Puerto Rico, not the United States, and there would be no path to statehood. But this wasn't terribly constitutional. Congress did extend US citizenship to Puerto Ricans in 1917. Now it's a commonwealth with its own government that has no voice in the US Congress or presidential elections and no control over its own defense or environmental policy. The Philippines were treated similarly to Puerto Rico in a series of cases between 1901 and 1904, collectively called the Insular Cases. But Hawaii was treated differently because it had a sizable population of American settlers who happened to be white. Ergo, it became a traditional territory with a path to statehood because white people, and also pineapples. Now let's briefly talk about anti-imperialism. There were lots of people who objected to imperialism on racial grounds, arguing that it might be...
Hi, everyone. Okay, so let's go in our short class to our debate. But before I do that, I want to call your attention to this interest in China. And William McKinley was the president during the outbreak of the Spanish-American War. And William McKinley was the president at the time, and he comes from my hometown. He was from Canton, Ohio, where I'm from in Ohio, this small town now about 100 kilometers south of Cleveland. And the only reason I mention this is because you can see in that discussion of American expansion, in imperialistic expansion into Asia, there was a great interest in China and access to Chinese markets. And that had always been an important motivation for American business people, because it was so important that even this town, many towns in the United States are named Canton, which is the Cantonese dialect for, in Cantonese language, China language for Guangzhou. Guangzhou in Cantonese dialect is called Canton. And there are a number of Canton cities in the United States called Canton, Ohio. There's a Canton, New York, a Canton, Michigan, a Canton, Missouri, named when these small towns were founded in the early 19th century after this Chinese city, because so many American business people, tradesmen, were making money already, 200 years ago in doing business with China. And they were so enthusiastic about doing business with China, they named these new cities, founded these new cities as naming them after China, right? It says here, it's Cantonese name of Guangzhou. So there's a lot of places called Canton in North America, in the United States, because of the enthusiasm about these people, about these American business people making their money through doing business with China. And so before I forget, William McKinley also is notable because he was, in a sense, the last president who was a relatively minor figure in American presidential administration. According to one book I read, it used in American politics class, William McKinley used to come into the office at 9 o'clock in the morning and leave at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And he only had a staff of 11 people that worked directly for him. He had 11 people who worked directly for him, just for his office, that supporting him in his office. 11 people. Can you imagine that? Now, when you look at the people, the size of the bureaucracy 100 years later, over 100 years later, that work for the US president, not for the departments, not for the different departments like the War Department or the Defense Department or the State Department, but just work for the president. There are thousands and thousands of people that work directly for the president in his Office of Management and Budget and his chief of his staff, thousands and thousands of people that work directly for the president. But when he was president, only 11 people worked for him. And he was the last president also who was a Civil War veteran, who fought in the American Civil War. And he was assassinated by an angry person about not getting a job in the US government, and was replaced by Theodore Roosevelt. So but before I forget, let's go on here and do our attendance, because I will forget, and if I don't do it now. And so let me go to that site, and first we have to log in and go to American history, and your smart attendance number is 494. 494 is your smart attendance number, 494. So let me put 494 here, and that's your smart attendance number. Okay, and so we should, since we have limited time, go directly to our debate. And then when we finish the debate, we'll finish up the exercise we did on American trade union movement, and go to breakout rooms. And so only 3 of you that, as far as I could see, were con on the debate topic. So we'll have one group is con, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we'll have 4 groups that will be pro. So I will assign you manually, and room 1 is con, and that will be Kim Tong Yoon. Let me see, Kim Tong Yoon, okay, and Park Ji-un, and Sung Un Sang. And let me see, Sung Un Sang, there we go, okay. And then in room 2 will be pro 1, yes, and so I will sign, it doesn't matter, like this. And in room 3 will be pro 2, and rename and assign 1, 2, 3, and okay. And room 4 will be pro 3, and yes, and assign. And we have a few more people than actually submitted paragraphs, so I have to go back and assign you to your room. So we'll just add, let's see here, assign 1, assign 2, assign to pro 3, assign, okay. And so please join your rooms. Please join your rooms. And we have to decide who's going to speak first. So heads will be the first person in the group, or the first half, and it is tails. So tails is if it's heads, it's the bottom person in the group, and it's tails, so it's the second person from the bottom. So that means we will have Park Ji-un will speak for con, Kim Soo-hwan will speak first for pro 1, and maybe move you to pro 1. Okay, there we go. And UG will speak for, Song Min-ju will speak for pro 2, and Owen Tech will speak for pro 3. And so, so please prepare your statements as to your position on the debate topic. And again, the debate topic is, here we go back to assignments, and the debate topic is to South Koreans, American expansion all the way to the South China Sea shows that internal class conflict and external imperialist expansion have a close causal relationship. And so I am going to be pro or con, and I will decide by flipping a coin. If I am pro, heads, I'm pro, tails, I'm con. And I'm con, so I'll write a con statement. And so please prepare your statements, and let me do that as well. Con. Okay. And so let me close the Okay. So who's going to speak first for pro? Heads, it's pro 1, and it's tails. Heads, it's pro 2, and it's heads. So Songmin-ju, please explain your pro position on the debate question.
I agree that to South Koreans, American expansion all the way to the South China Sea shows that internal class conflict and external imperialist expansion have a close causal relationship, because at that time, American government believed that overseas markets for American goods might help relieving the economic crisis, and that will reduce the class conflicts. So that's why the American government began these expansionist policies.
Okay. And Khan, let's hear your first statement. For the first person to speak for Khan is Song Un-sang. No, I'm sorry, Park Ji-un. Park Ji-un. Go, Park Ji-un.
Okay. Well, I thought if class struggle was the element of America's imperialist expansion, all Americans would have no sense of refusal against the aggression for keeping their honor as a hegemony.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that Americans' desire for hegemony is not directly related to class conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but what if someone were to argue that, in fact, by appealing to American pride, by American glory, by giving American workers and poor people pride through imperial conquest and the glory of American weapons and arms, that brainwashes them not to focus on their economic misery? How do you respond to that?
I think I need to more think about that.
I think Howard Zinn would not disagree with that, and there has been some research, particularly important research, in terms of, for example, explaining British politics, not so much American politics, but British politics. And it's hard to overemphasize. Again, we're talking about Great Britain now, not talking about the United States, but as Seymour Martin Lipset most pointed out in that textbook, that book I keep referencing. We always engage in comparative analysis. When we try to talk about the United States and what American history is significant and interesting, we're always explicitly or implicitly comparing it with something else, whether it be a different phase in American history or other countries. But certainly, I think it's hard to overestimate the importance of British imperialism and British identity with the empire in terms of explaining, for example, Britain's leaving the European Union, and Britain's Brexit, and British politics. That British class conflict has been controlled partly by the pride that all British people feel in their empire and in their king or queen as both king and emperor, as they used to call themselves before they lost their empire. But in the American case, is that really as important as it has been in the British case? Howard Zinn reminds me a lot of he insists that he uses Marxist framework, and so he's going to try to first find explanations for American foreign policy behavior in class conflict. And I think the Americans have let's go to the next pro rather than me keep talking here. So that was Song Min-ju, and so pro 1 is heads and it's tails. So pro 4, and that is who do we ask to speak? Own Tech. What is your group statement for pro?
the recent conflict between the US and China in the South China Sea is one of the biggest issue in international relations around the world, and it is one of the very old typical governance methods to claim complaints within the state by setting external enemies and turning their attention to them.
Yeah, I think I can. I mean, I wrote a con statement, and I think that might be true. But you know, the U.S. didn't pick on very powerful enemy. I mean, you know, the United States fought Spain. Spain, everybody knew Spain was a backwater of Europe at this point. Spain was weak. Spain. I mean, the Americans didn't find a big enemy like Britain or France or Russia, not even Japan, to go to war with, because they were more powerful. So you know, the Americans, you know, they overthrew Hawaii when Hawaii was a weak little kingdom in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and took it, and then they beat up Spain, but they wouldn't confront powerful states. And if you really wanted to motivate your actors, I mean, Vladimir. What I'm getting to is Vladimir Lenin. Vladimir Lenin, during the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, Lenin would argue that World War I happened because of competition over empires. That the British and the French and the Germans were competing for markets. In the form of empires, that they needed those markets in order to overcome the crisis of capitalism that Karl Marx predicted. That capitalism as an economic and political system has these internal contradictions that lead to overproduction and the need to find markets to export that production, or else prices will collapse. And you see that. I mean, again, it's interesting to me. I mean, John Green's history of the world, of the American history series that I'm showing pieces of here in the class, again, that also looks like that series is strongly influenced by Howard Zinn. That Howard Zinn's book, which has been available for 41 years now, since 1980, has had a big influence on many teachers and of American history. So you can find individual people in history who make statements about, like Theodore Roosevelt. A number of you mentioned how Theodore Roosevelt said war is good for the state. Other people, individuals you can find in old newspapers and in historical accounts that said that we need markets for exports. But then when you look at the overall behavior in the United States, you have to really ask, is class conflict really driving why America go to war with Spain? I mean, to take the Philippines and to take the and what was left of and maybe to get access to Cuba, or was it really more economic interests of rich, powerful men who thought we could make a lot more money if we could get access to Cuba and take and make sure we have a foothold in Asia, because we don't want the Japanese and the Germans and the French and the British to divide up all of big China so that we can't make money there, because they're going to try to keep it for French business people and British business people and German business people. We have to make sure we're there so that we can make sure that we can make money there. But that making money is not the same as expanding the empire in order to control working class people by brainwashing them, by appealing to their emotions of being proud supporters of the American government, because the American government is so glorious and wonderful in its great empire. You know, America came late to building an overseas empire. Only at the end of the 18th century did it do that. You know, the British had an overseas empire for hundreds of years, right? Since the 16th century, they started expanding their overseas empire. So anyway, so let's go to Khan. And again, Khan gets to speak a lot because only a few people were Khan. So we already had Pak Ji-un. So Kim Tong-yoon will be heads, and it's Song-un Song. Song-un Song, please speak. What is your Khan statement?
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Please mute
What's
your
happening?
somebody. I'm going to have to mute everybody. Mute.
Okay.
Song Sang, go.
Yes. Okay, I'll begin now.
Yes.
As a Korean student, I don't think American expansion all the way to the South China Sea shows internal class conflicts and external imperialist expansion have a close casual relationship. Because I thought in late 19th century, imperialism was settled as a social norm. So most of the European countries on their colonies and expanded markets were more profitable. America wasn't different in this case. So
Okay.
Captain A.T. Mahan of the US Navy mentioned that countries with strong Navy power would rule the world. Also, President Roosevelt was also conscious of trade relationship with China, because trading with China for more profit was important. But more important thing was reaching to China was the key for shaping American policy toward Hawaii, Philippines, and all of Asia. With these reasons, I thought American expansion toward China Sea only shows the imperialism of America.
Yeah, I mean, what are the Filipinos going to buy? I mean, what can the Americans sell to the Philippines? If America is expanding its empire to export its surplus products, what are the Filipinos going to buy? They're tremendously poor people. I mean, I think the Americans were in the Philippines primarily because they wanted access to China. And like I told you, Americans have been doing business with Asia and China for a long time. Before Teddy Roosevelt became president. I mean, like I told you, all these towns were named Canton in the United States, Guangzhou, in the early part of the 19th century, in the 1820s, because American business people are making so much money doing trade with China, and they did not want to lose access to that trade as the French become more active and the Germans become more active and the Japanese become more active and the British are already there, right? The British and the Portuguese are already there. I mean, I think even the Dutch, right? I mean, and they're having an impact. I think what someone told me that you Koreans know about the Imjin War, right? The war with Japan 500 years ago, that somehow a big role was played by the Dutch from the Netherlands in providing new gunpowder weapons to the Japanese. And so the Dutch gave these, traded with Japan, and Japan started using its products to and technology to try to expand its empire in Asia. So they're all expanding, but they're primarily motivated by economic interests. And it's easy. I mean, that's the point. China is big but weak. Right, these Asian countries like Philippines and the Japanese and the Spanish possessions in the Pacific are weak, and they're easy to threaten with force. Even the Americans, right, will send their own navy. Even before the Civil War in 1854, they go to Japan and threaten to blow up the Japanese port with American artillery. Unless the Japanese allow Americans to come and do business there and trade there. And that's because it was easy to do that, because Japan was very weak at the time. Later, then, of course, after the war, the Americans would do the same thing with Korea, with trying to open up Korea for business, right? When Korea was weak. And if you really want to motivate the workers to be passive, the best example is World War I, right? I mean, World War I that would happen, started in 1914, was a big shock to Marxists, because Marxist theorists had been arguing about to people, to workers, to French workers, to German workers, to Austrian workers, to Russian workers, that you workers are all workers first. and you should be united as workers in the global communist workers movement, not to be exploited and to overcome your exploitation. Remember, workers, you're workers. Don't fall for the propaganda. Don't accept the propaganda that you're Germans and French and you should. And then World War I begins, and all of these French workers and these German workers and these Italian workers parties, that the political parties that represent these workers, vote to give complete support to the government in the war, to kill other workers and other soldiers as workers as soldiers in other countries during the war. And that was a big shock to the communist movement, that working class ideology, working class identity was so easily overcome during a time of to be replaced with German identity and German nationalism and French nationalism and Italian nationalism. Italian workers would gladly kill German workers as soldiers, despite all the efforts of the communist leaders to try to convince people that, you know, you shouldn't fall for the brainwashing, the propaganda. So let me go now to the, we have to pick up our pace here. Did everybody speak? Owen Tech, Chongmin-ju, UJE for Pro 1.
Okay. There is a controversy over whether trust people precede cooperation or should proceed from trust. The problem of the South China Sea arises because the difficulty of determining the priority of casual relationships differs from person to person in perception of a specific situation. So if the war crisis increases and the weapon of mass destruction increases, the lives of the ordinary people in each country will fall. To manage the South China Sea peacefully, efforts to resolve differences and find ways to cooperate are needed.
Yeah, I mean, you know, is this a factor motivating? I mean, I think, you know, maybe things are different today because China is a big, powerful country, right? We in 2021, China is a big, powerful country, and it's formally, officially the People's Republic of China, ruled by the Chinese Communist Party. And there is polarization and conflict in America that is mixed with nationalism and identity due to resentment, partly due to global capitalism, globalization. Okay, so I can see how you could make that argument about how today that the conflict in Asia is being used by people like Joe Biden and Donald Trump to win elections and get political support and to win elections and stay in power. And that is a way to direct people's unhappiness about, you know, the absence of good paying jobs for people who can't speak more than one language, people who do not have a college degree. Remember, 2/3, I mean, something like most American adults do not have a college degree, not to mention they don't speak more than one language the way you speak English. They don't do that in America. So their lives are increasingly, a lot of those people have a life which they view as insecure and unhappy, that they're not respected, that they're not doing as well compared to other people as their parents did and great and grandparents did. And so, yeah, you could make that argument that there's class conflict and people being brainwashed to focus on a foreign enemy. But okay, and you can point to China today, but you know, again, if we go back 150 years, Asian countries were not a threat to America. It was hard to mobilize people around a perceived threat from China. China wasn't seen as a threat 200 years ago. China was nothing. It was a big poverty-stricken country where you could do lots of business because there's so many people living there, right? And like I told you, people were excited about China. They named American cities, new young American cities after Guangzhou, like Canton, Ohio, and Canton, Florida, and Canton, Michigan, and Canton, New York, and Canton, there's a lot of them, Canton, Georgia. Like, woo, money, man, money. But that's not because they're they're glad that, but that's different from today, right? So, we're running out of time. Again, this is our short class. We have to make sure that we get to finish up the trade union exercise. And so let me go to the vote here. And so now you've heard the arguments today. So please vote. And let me make sure that you can see that. Go to share screen. And so please vote on the debate topic. So you can see it here, and we'll just do that for 15 seconds. I really appreciate these opportunities I have with you to work through these issues and topics by speaking with you about them. Because again, I learn from them as well. I mean, I'm thinking about these topics right now, and I'm trying to, like I said, I have to write papers just like I ask you to write papers. And so I'm trying to come up with new ideas and interesting arguments, particularly about America and America's behavior in the world. And I have to say that this focus on national security is really important in America, is the only way you can really motivate American people to think about something beyond their own individual interests. More so, that's true for a lot of countries, but it's really true in the United States, because the Americans do not want to believe and don't like believing that there's such there is such a thing as a greater good, that there is a collective obligation to the well-being of our overall community. Americans don't like to talk in those terms, but you can't appeal to them if you talk about foreign threats, national security. That's how you motivate them to do something for the greater good. And that means they're predisposed to look for enemies. And I think, that's something that I think these exercises really illustrate. But anyway, let's now go back to the Lawrence singing strike, or bread and roses strike, it's also called. What's this? Okay, so let me go back to the US history class here and find, I sent you this file. Let me get it so you can see it here, and go to share screen, and you can see here. So can we win? And so you can see the file that you have here. Of course, Zinn and his students think that this is the first modern strike. I think that's the point they're trying to make. This is the first modern strike that you're seeing in terms of strikers in unskilled mass manufacturing, right? You have the emergence now of the first early mass unskilled factories that employ hundreds of or even thousands of people, and so this is an important strike for establishing the notion of being a member of the working class. I mean, remember, if you're a carpenter, or you're a bricklayer, or you're a stonemason, or you're a leather worker, you can make yourself believe that you are a skilled artisan tradesman that is engaged in self-employment, right? That you're still yourself something different. But these people, they're just workers, and they're doing something that just about anybody can do. You don't even need to speak English to do this kind of work. You're just a body in a factory doing the same repetitive work all the time. And so these kinds of trade union movements are doing a lot to try to form in people's minds this notion that, you know what, we are proletarians, we are workers. Like Karl Marx said, we are proletarians. Look how miserable we live. Look how hard we work. So I think this is why this strike is a particular focus of interest for Zinn and his supporters. So we only have 15 minutes here. An outdoor meeting of thousands of strikers, men, women, and children, discussed and then agreed on the demands of the strike. People would not return to work until 4 conditions were met: an increase in their wage, extra pay for working overtime, and ended the premium system of payment and the pressures it brought. Like you have to use your wages to buy company products. No penalties or discrimination against strikers. So those people that led this strike are not going to be punished, are not going to be fired, right? Each day, there are mass meetings organized according to nationality. So the groups are meeting according to where they come from. Hungarians met with Hungarians, Italians with Italians, etc. These were the major decision-making meetings chaired by people elected from the group. Here, delegates report to the strikers and receive further directions from them. I should tell you, there were lots of these kinds of organizations that emerged around the ethnic group that these people came from. So these places are disappearing, but like there is, again, from Canton, Ohio, where I'm from, which is an old industrial area, there used to be a Serbian club and a Croatian club, and where these different ethnic groups would come together and socialize and meet and eat and drink. Let's not forget, but these clubs are disappearing. They're disappearing as these people assimilate, but this ethnic connection is important. A strike committee met every morning to coordinate activities. It consisted of elected delegates, 4 from each of the 14 nationality groups, 56 in all, covering every workplace and every type of job. Delegates could be replaced at any time by the group that elected them. A second committee of 56 served as a backup in case members of the strike committee were arrested by the police. Delegates met outdoors so that their discussions could be heard and evaluated by everyone. So no secret meetings. The meetings are open to everyone. In these gatherings, the many strikers who attended would gain a renewed sense of their own numbers and strength. On Saturdays and Sundays, so that notion also of needing to convince people that they have the power to win, that it's not hopeless, even though the business owners and the managers are using all of their resources to convince people it's hopeless, hopeless, hopeless. And if you do not compromise or you do not submit, we're going to punish you. So you have to keep people having a strong sense of hope. On Saturdays and Sundays, huge meetings brought everyone together, tens of thousands of strikers and their families. At these and at the daily ethnic group meetings, there was entertainment in addition to reports and discussions. People sang together, danced, and enjoyed performances by their neighbors. So we have public entertainment. We have civil society, right? These were meetings for all strikers, whether or not they were IWW members. In addition, the IWW called special meetings for women and children to encourage their participation in leadership. Again, people are learning how to be Americans at these meetings in this labor movement. Organizers talk extensively with husbands to overcome their resistance to wives speaking in public or marching on the picket lines. In the difficult conditions of the strike, people discovered many new abilities, chairing meetings, speaking in public, organizing committees. There were numerous efforts to divide the strikers. That's an important point. Newspapers and some religious leaders criticized husbands for permitting their wives and daughters to play an active role. Attempts were made to pit ethnic groups against each other. Some priests told Irish workers, for instance, that they were superior to the non-English speaking nationalities. City officials charged that some workers were illegal immigrants and should be deported. These efforts took their toll. Some husbands kept their wives at home. Some nationalities participated more actively than did others. Overwhelmingly, however, the strikers remained firm, maintaining a belief that everyone had a right to work in decent conditions and to develop fully his or her capabilities. And so we only have like 8 minutes here. All right, so let me ask you to, let me go back to breakout rooms. So we have 4 groups here. So let me rename this, group 1, question 1, yes, question 2, yes, question 3, yes, and question 4. Okay, so I would like you to room 1, focus on question 1, room 2, focus on question 2, room 3, focus on question 3, and room 4, focus on question 4. So open those rooms, please rejoin those groups. And so question one, group one deal with the first question, group two deal with the second question, group three deal with the third question, and group four deal with the fourth question. Group one, shall we claim victory and go back to work? Early in the strike, without meeting any of the strikers, the employers agree to restore the 56-hour pay rate. If we don't go back to work, they may withdraw that decision. So should you go back to, should you claim victory and go back to work? The workers are going back to paying you 56 hours of work. Remember, the strike started when they cut your pay because you're now only allowed to work 54 hours. The commanding officer of the militia, who has been sent to Lawrence, insists that different groups of strikers should meet separately with each employer. His hope is that agreements will be reached with some employers and that some strikers will return to work. How do you respond? So the different group of strikers should meet separately with each employer. Question three, our strike committee has just traveled to Boston to meet with the president of the largest group of mills. No agreement was reached, but now false reports are being circulated and newspapers are announcing that a settlement was reached and the strike is over. Tomorrow is Monday. We know that employers are gearing up to open the mills. If you believe the rumors and return to work, the strike will be lost. What can we do? And group four, there are still some people crossing the picket lines. Some of them are showing up at the relief committees while continuing to work. Should we feed them? And see who's going to speak first. Heads is the first half of the group, and it's tails. Heads is the bottom person. And okay, so the person at the bottom of the list of each question group will speak for each group. So Song-un Sang, what are your views on the first question? Should you go claim victory and go back to work? Now that the employers have agreed to pay you what they were previously paying you rather than give you a pay cut? Song-un Sang?
Yes.
Should you go back to work?
Go back to work?
Yes. Question one, should you go back to work?
Pardon?
You don't know. Who can help him? Ora Kim Tong-yoon, can you help him? Or Park Ji-yoon, can you help him? What do you think they did? Did they go back to work?
Yes.
No, they didn't go back to work. No. Okay, group two, Chong Song-hyun.
Yep.
Should they meet separately with each, the employers meet separately with each group?
Separately? Oh, no. So we were told to go back, and I think we're being coerced by the militia as well. So we agreed that we're not going to back down. No matter
Okay, good. And question three, Lee-hyun, should you how are you going to deal with the misinformation, the false news, the fake news that the employers are circulating that the mills are going to open on Monday and the strike is over? What do you do?
I guess they can protest against it.
Yeah, and you can also start your own newspaper, right?
Yes.
That's an important point. You need to communicate. You need to have a public relations strategy, public relations, PR. You need to have a PR strategy, public relations. You got to communicate. in order to make sure that people understand, what is propaganda and what is the truth, at least from your perspective. And since we're running out of time, group 4, Chang Ji-hei, should you feed people who are crossing the picket lines, going to work, and showing up at the relief committees asking for food?
Yes.
You should. Oh, are you going to try to convince them that they shouldn't do that, though? That they shouldn't cross the picket lines?
Yes.
Okay. And so again, we only have 1 minute left. So let me go back to the other, and I don't think I'm going to be able to get through all of this, but, and so you can see here that, let me show this screen, share screen, and you can see here, violence has been increasing. Well, I guess, we can't really get through it all anyway. This is a long, involved exercise, but just to show you, again, that these are the kind of questions you face, and that had to be addressed in this first ever, I guess you'd call it modern mass strike of an industry-wide strike, which, you would see then throughout the 20th century in the United States. The automobile workers would go on strike. Automobile industry is beginning at this time. And, even my, when I was a child into the 1970s, you would still have the auto workers going on strike or the steel workers going on strike as the end of these modern strikes involving mass manufacturing. Now we have a different kind of political economic conditions in the United States. So these kind of strikes are almost gone now in North America. But I guess that's where we'll stop today. And so please sign up for a conference session if you haven't done that, and we will discuss my comments on your papers next week. Okay. Okay. Bye.